Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to explain the solution of problems and applications question 5. So here you were given willingness to pay for different number of bottles for each resident. So the first bottle is $10, second 8, 6 and so on. So the first question is asking if the cost of producing a bottle of Z-Lerp is 3.5 and the competitive suppliers sell at this price. So this means the supply curve is horizontal at that price and the supply curve is perfectly elastic. So this is an important information because we are going to use this information when we impose tax on the sale price of the bottles, consumer surplus, for each consumer. There are two ways you can do. You can calculate the total willingness to pay and then subtract the price of it. But what we know is that the consumer is going to buy the first bottle. Why? Because the willingness to pay is $10 and the price is 3.5. So the consumer receives $6.5 of surplus. Second bottle is going to be about 2 because 8 minus 3.5 is $4.5. Third bottle is going to be bought as well. 6 minus 3.5, $2.5. And the fourth bottle is going to be purchased as well because still we have a positive surplus. The consumer is not going to buy the fifth bottle. So therefore the total consumer for each consumer is going to be 6.5 plus 4.5 plus 2.5 plus 0.5 is going to be $14. So what we are going to write here, each consumer is going to consume 4 bottles and receive a consumer surplus of $14. Next question, producing Z-Lerp creates pollution. Each bottle has an external cost of $1. Taking this additional cost into account, total surplus per person in the allocation you previously determined decreases to what? So here we know that each bottle has $1 of external cost times 4 bottles, $4 of external cost for consumer, but each consumer. So we know that each consumer's consumer surplus is 14 minus 4, therefore $10. So taking this additional cost, total surplus per person decreases to $10. The reason your textbook says here total consumer surplus is because producers have no surplus. Their cost is 3.5 and they are selling at 3.5. Therefore, all consumer surplus is total surplus in the market. And if you remember that total surplus is the sum of consumer surplus plus producer surplus. Since this is 0, all total surplus is consumer surplus. Cindy, one of the residents, decides on her own to reduce her consumption of Z-Lerp by 1 bottle. Cindy's consumer surplus. Now we are going to calculate the Cindy's consumer surplus without the cost of pollution. So let's calculate her consumer surplus or total surplus given that she gives up consuming the 4th bottle. So we are going to get rid of this one, right? She's not going to consume the last bottle. Therefore, she's not going to receive 0.5. And we are going to sum this consumer surplus of each bottle up until the 3rd bottle. So 6.5 plus 4.5 plus 2.5. So now she's consuming 3 bottles. Therefore, 6.5 plus 4.5 plus 2.5, which is 13.5. So the right answer here is supposed to be 13.5. 13.5. And now the next question is her decision. The right answer is increases total surplus by $0.5. I'm going to explain the reason now. So remember that we have now total surplus or consumer surplus of $13.5 and she's now consuming 3 bottles and 3 bottles have an external cost of $3. So from total surplus 13.5 we subtract the $3, we have 10.5 net surplus per consumer. But if you remember, with the consumption of the 4th bottle, we have a net surplus of $10. How did we find it? We find out the total surplus of each consumer by summing up the consumer surplus for each bottle and subtract the external cost of consuming 4 bottles. So we get the net surplus of $10. But if Sandy gives up consuming the 4th bottle, her total surplus turns out to be 13.5. If we subtract the cost of 3 bottles, external cost, her total surplus is 10.5. As you see, the total surplus increases from 10 to 10.5. Calculate the consumer surplus with 4 bottles. Each has $1 of external cost. And then calculate the consumer surplus with 3 bottles and subtract the external cost. And you will see that the total surplus increases from 10 to 10.5 per individual. Therefore, her decision increases total surplus by 0.5. Now the next one, we are going to incorporate a $1 tax. So the mayor is imposing a $1 tax on each bottle of Zilur. Now we need to calculate the consumption per person. So now we have $1 tax. And remember, I said that the shape of supply curve is important here. Okay, so this is supply, this is demand, right? If you impose a tax of $1, let's say this is the size of the tax, $1, all the tax is going to increase the price the consumers pay. The reason is because supply is perfectly elastic. That means suppliers can pass through the tax to the consumers. As you remember from the previous chapters, tax incidence is shared by buyers and sellers, but it depends on the elasticity. If the supply perfectly elastic, then demand or consumers pay the entire tax. Therefore, suppliers now are going to sell instead of 3.5, they add $1 to the price, $4.5. Okay, just remember from previous chapters, just a quick recap. If you have this, right, this is demand, this is supply. Tax burden is shared. This is how much buyers pay, this is how much sellers pay. But in this case, since the supply is perfectly elastic, there is nothing that we can count for the supply side, how much they pay. Therefore, all the amount is passed through price. So now consumers are paying $4.5 per bottle. Now let's calculate the consumer surplus when the price is $4.5. First bottle is 10 minus 4.5, we have 5.5. Second bottle is 3.5. And now the third bottle is 1.5. As you see, the fourth bottle is not going to be purchased because the price is higher than willingness to pay. So 5.5 plus 3.5 is 9. And 1.5 is total of 10.5. So we know that consumption per person is 3 bottles, and this yields a per person consumer surplus of 10.5, not including the cost of pollution. And now the external cost of pollution, since the consumption is 3 bottles, times 1, total of $3. And how about government revenue? Government revenue is $3 too, because government is collecting $1 per bottle times 3. That's the government revenue per person. Total surplus per person is now, we have government too, so we have 10.5 from each consumer. But they need to pay $3 for external costs, but also government now an additional $3 revenue. Therefore, total surplus turns out to be 10.5. I hope you understand this part. So this is the consumer's surplus, minus they need to pay $3 for the bottles external costs. And there is government surplus too, because they have tax revenue. So that's a total of 10.5. So 10.5 is the total surplus as a result of this policy. And based on your calculations, you would support the mayor's policy because it increases welfare compared to before the tax. So we know that before the tax, each person has $10, right? $10 of consumer surplus. $14 minus the $4 of external cost, $10. But because of this policy, Now the welfare increases to 10.5. So this is how you're going to solve this question. I hope it will be helpful for you to continue with different versions of the same question.